Hi, good evening, everyone, for either braving the cold or joining online to another Macau Business TV series debate, this time concerning digital currencies and the future of money. The event today is jointly held by the Cunha Foundation, the Observatory of China, and the Macau Business Macau News Agency. My name is Nelson Moura. I'm editor-in-chief of Macau News Agency, which today marks its 4th anniversary. And the topic today is probably one of the issues most on everyone's minds every day, is about money. And more the money we use in our daily lives has become bits in a computer screen, unless we recur to live cash and fiat currencies. So to talk about this crucial matter, we have today with us a panel of distinguished speakers. We have today with us Mr. Daniel Senna Fernandes, consultant of Riquito Advogados. We also have Ms. Chen, Dean of the Faculty of Business Administration and Chair Professor in Accounting and Finance for the University of Macau. Thanks for joining us. We also have Oriol Caudevilla, co-leader of the CBDC and Financial Inclusion Working Groups of Global Impact FinTech Forum. And we also have Daniel Farinha, a senior lecturer for the University of St. Joseph. So thanks everyone for joining for this debate. We also have as a discussant Rui Lourido, President of the Observatory of China. So Mr. Lourido and Mr. Caudevilla will be joining us by Zoom, as we can see. And co-chairing this session today, we have with us José Carlos Matias, Director of Macau News Agency and Macau Business.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nelson. Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to all of you who have joining us here at Cunha Foundation. Big thanks to our esteemed panelists, our guest speakers. We'd like to greet all of you who are joining us via Zoom. Do not forget that you may and are encouraged to drop your questions in the chat so you can join the conversation. And we are also live on Facebook. So this is really a very exciting topic. And I would like to kickstart this conversation with Professor Chen. Let's start by talking about China's approach to digital currency. We have a big advancement already in terms of the central bank-backed digital currency electronic payment. We have it being used at a trial level in the many places and events over the past year and especially in recent months. Tell us about the transformational impact of the digital yuan and the developments that we've been witnessing in China and also the impact here. Thank you very much, Professor, please.
Okay, thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to participate in this very lovely debates and the forum, so-called. And I would like to now start to introduce some development of digital currency in China. Well, actually, I think China started this very early, back to 2014. It's already 7 years. Really, in terms of the speed of development and the current stage of development, I would say it is a leading position in the world. So back to 2014, the government start these initiatives by set up a steering group, a task force to specially working on this, develop this digital currency. Then last year, actually, under the COVID-19, although COVID-19 has stopped a lot of activities, create a lot of barriers and inconvenience for our daily life, for the economic development, but actually they cannot stop the rapid development of this digital currency. That actually, I think, facilitate the development of digital currency. We take last year, for example, probably the most active year of the digital currency development in China. So the government, central bank, actually completed the top layer of digital currency design and also standard setting, function development, and testing. And also central bank started to draft a related article and try to incorporate the digital currency in the bank law. At the moment, it is in the consultation stage. Testing basis set up, primarily they set up several areas as a test bed, including Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei, Jing, Jingyi area, Pearl River dialect near the Yangtze River in Jiangsu province, and the Great Bay area. And they also selected a few cities in the inland area and also the western area. Other development is although the platform may be available, maybe the technology is sort of available, we need to find application scenario. The government and the central bank has already decided to use the next year's Beijing Winter Olympics as an application scenario. Looks very encouraging and very interesting. We're talking about this year. In February, China working together with Hong Kong Financial Administration Bureau, 香港金管局, and also Thai Central Bank, United Arabic Central Bank, to develop a research project on how to use the digital currency for cross-border transactions. And it's going on, it's already kicked off, looks very, again, very promising, very interesting research project. So overall, putting together all this exciting development, I think the China as a whole really in a leading position in the international stage of a digital currency development.
Thanks, Professor Chen, for the explanation. I will just pass the ball to Mr. Caudevilla, which is live now from Hong Kong. And I know that you're based in Hong Kong, but you follow developments on this area from all over the region, including Greater Bay Area and Macau. But in this question, I just wanted to know your view on the advancements of the use of digital currency in Hong Kong that you've witnessed in the past years, and maybe some of those experiences that could be replicated in Macau. Thanks a lot.
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for having me here today. It is a pleasure to share the stage with all of you. And then going back to your question, I think that Hong Kong is actually right now one of the hotspots when it comes to CBDCs, like in the world. I mean, I would say in the whole world, because as Professor Chen just mentioned, they are not just working on testing the digital yuan or DCEP for cross-border transactions, but they are also involved in more projects than that one. For example, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority is currently engaged as well in this MCBDC bridge project, which Professor Chen just mentioned, and which involves as well not just the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, but also the People's Bank of China and the central banks of Thailand and the United Arab Emirates. It's actually a wholesale CBDC project, so it's a bit different to the retail ones, but still, I think it is interesting to have a look at that one because it's been an ongoing project for a few years. It started in 2017 as Intanon Lion Rock project. Initially, it only involved central banks of Thailand and Hong Kong, but last year, this project was extended to include more countries. So you can see that it's going quite well so far. And aside from that, on October 4th, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority published a report on the idea of a potential electronic Hong Kong dollar. So, I mean, I don't mean by that we will necessarily get there in the future, but we might get there as well, no? So that's why we see Hong Kong working on the CBDC perspective from different angles. Going back to the idea of Hong Kong testing digital yuan for cross-border payments, I think this is actually very interesting in the sense that, to me, one of the main purposes behind China being so active on trying to promote and deploy digital yuan is precisely that idea of trying to make the RMB become a much more relevant currency in international trade. I mean, we all know that so far and for decades, the US dollar has been by far like the most dominant economy in world trade, and this has been like that like for ages. But China deploying digital yuan successfully may, to some extent, at least partially, challenge this situation. It is so because, there are fairs. As Professor Chen mentioned before, China is actually moving very fast. China is not going to be the first country deploying a CBDC, to be honest, because the Bahamas in the Caribbean did so last year in September 2020. Nigeria just launched its INAIRA. But when it comes to major economies, China is going to be the first one. And they are like much faster than either Europe or the US. So in that sense, it might become possible for China, to try to convert some of the US dollar denominated transactions into RMB denominated ones, thanks to not just digital yuan, but also to these platforms that China is creating. For example, the One Belt and Road Initiative. Also, the RCEP, as you know, the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Free Trade Agreement, was signed last year in November. It creates a huge free trade area encompassing more than 30% of the world's total GDP and population. So China might be capable of leveraging those to try to internationalize its digital currency, and thus challenging to some extent the dominant position of the US dollar, even though, of course, that's not going to change like overnight. No, it's going to take time. And finally, before finishing my speech, you mentioned Macau. Macau is actually in a very interesting place right now, in the sense that, Macau is focusing towards finance, undoubtedly. Macau has been, among other things, a gaming hub for years, but we see a clear intention from the government and from many stakeholders to make this change and to make the financial services industry become much more relevant, also the FinTech industry. So that's why all these areas of digital currencies are actually interesting to Macau. I don't foresee an EP attack, for example, anytime soon. No, so far, as far as I know, the Macau government announced that it's planning to amend laws to regulate the issuance of a virtual legal tender. And if any currencies deployed in Macau, perhaps there have been talks about the idea of trying to deploy to some extent the digital yuan, especially in the casinos, etc. But Macau is in a different position compared to Hong Kong because its financial industry is not as mature as Hong Kong's one. But nevertheless, I think it is quite important to keep track of these movements because Macau can definitely leverage those, especially now that the GBA, the Greater Bay Area, is becoming so important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oriol, Caudevilla, for together with Professor Chen, laying the foundations for this very important topic. And we do have a number of very key developments singled out by Professor Chen, by Oriol, Caudevilla. I would now bring into the conversation Professor Daniel Farinha, and I will take a step back and for beginners. So after all, what is the difference between a digital currency and the digital transactions that we already have, the mobile payments that we already carry out, the wire transfers, which are like money being transferred, and e-payments which are already taking place? What's the difference between this and when we talk about digital currencies or cryptocurrencies? What's all about? Thank you.
That's a great question. Actually, I think the answer, unfortunately, is always depends. Depends on each country's implementation of their digital currency initiative. So, but normally you think of a payment, online payment or digital payment, as having something like an application on your mobile device, which you can then use to make payments to any merchant that accepts that form of payment. When you look at the balance that you have on your digital wallet, that is just a balance that's kept by an institution, such as the payment provider, for example, WeChat Pay, Alipay, or a bank institution. that asset is actually stored by that private institution. So that's the one thing to remember. These are private companies who are holding assets on your behalf. And the asset is basically, you are trusting that, that company, that private company, to not run away with the funds or not to close down or to go bankrupt. Digital currencies provide a more direct channel between a central government and the retail market, so the customers. So it actually can issue currency much like cash, something you can hold. And unlike bank accounts or payment systems, when you have cash, that's something tangible that you have that no one can take away from you. Digital currencies are more like cash in that sense, in the sense that when you have that currency, you actually hold currency without depending directly on a private company. So there's a component to that. It can depend between implementations as well. But that's I think the consensus is that most digital currencies, central government digital currencies will have that component that you're actually dealing with cash issued by the government rather than IOU issued by a private company. So that's the main component. And then we have a whole other side of what's called cryptocurrencies, which add a different element, which we can get into later.
Thanks, Mr. Farinha. And I guess I will jump to the other Daniel on the panel today. Because as Mr. Caudevilla mentioned just recently, the chief executive in his most recent policy address actually mentioned that next year could see the advancement of some legislation changes that would allow for a digital currency. So it was the first formal announcement that they would advance with something like this. And as a lawyer and somebody that is interested in the legislative aspects of digital currencies, and in your experience, have you seen other governments in other countries and regions advance with such legislation? If you could provide some insight on what kind of legislation could be required, what could be the challenges, so maybe you can clarify for us on that. Thanks a lot.
Firstly, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be talking about these topics. It's a great question. As you all know, I think Macau's Financial System Act it's dated, and it's as it is written right now, it cannot support any kind of digital currency. This does not mean to say that any other electronic payment systems will not be allowed. That's why we have platforms like MPay. But this, I think what the chief executive meant is to change the System Act, the Financial System Act, in a way that would allow for digital currencies such as the digital yuan to come to Macau, and any other prospective digital currencies that are directly linked to central banks. So basically, CBDCs would be allowed in Macau. So what I think is that an e-Patak, and I agree with Dr. Oriol, an e-Patak is not likely to make an appearance. And I do agree with Dr. Chen here that China made a very fast progress on developing this kind of coin and being able to deploy a pilot platform to test how this currency would react in the hands of different people. And to be honest, like Dr. Daniel Fernandes here said, running away with the money is exactly one of the biggest fears that people would have on digital currencies. I think that in Macau, and very much likely like at other places, people fear cryptocurrencies because they don't understand it. When in fact, cryptocurrencies are not that different from our fiat currencies. So there are a lot of changes to be done. We could start with accepting them, clearly, expressly accepting digital currencies as legal tender somehow. And that would imply having a future-proof definition of digital currency. And of course, this would also entail other questions regarding other cryptocurrencies. So not centralized currencies, digital currencies, talking about other currencies such as Bitcoin. Well, let's just stick to Bitcoin. There are too many.
Thank you, Mr. Senna Fernandes, for your take. There are so many from this first round, we have a number of takeaways for a discussion to look into this fascinating topic. And I will now bring into the conversation, joining us from Lisbon, Professor Rui Lourido is the president of Observatório da China, Observatory for China, and Rui Lourido was the one who first brought this idea of organizing together a talk on digital yuan, on digital currencies. And so thank you for bringing this into the conversation. And now, Rui Lourido, after this first round, what is your general take on this, seen from the lens of an NGO like Observatório da China, and also from the perspective of a historian?
Okay.
Good morning.
Hello. Are you hear me
Yes,
well?
we can hear you well. Thank you.
Okay. So, dear friends and colleagues, as president of Observatory for China, I want to thank to our partners for accepting the suggestion, this topic for discussion, to Rui Cunha Foundation, Macau News Agency, and the Macau Business. To our moderators, Nelson Moura, José, Matias, and to our guest speakers. Oriol Caudevilla was who first have the idea to have this kind of discussion in a period of time, and it was long ago. And two thanks to Chen, the Dean of Faculty of Business Administration, and Daniel Senna Fernandes, Daniel Farinha. First, I want to clarify that I'm not a specialist in digital currency or an economist. I'm a simple historian specialized in the relations between Europe, Portugal, and China. I would like to raise some notes and questions. The Chinese new digital currency electronic payment is run by the Central Bank of China, so with a national credit guarantee. Can we say that the digital yuan enjoys the same legal status as a physical renminbi, and the digital yuan is expected to completely replace physical cash? I wonder if you can explain a little more how China's financial system is changing and the major implications for the hegemony of the dollar, as an international monetary standard and for the world financial order. Some 140 million people had opened wallets for China new digital yuan as of October and use it for transactions, totalizing around 62 billion yuan. A senior Chinese central bank official said on Wednesday, Mr. Chen, the director general of the Digital Currency Institute of People Banks of China, told Hong Kong's FinTech Week conference there was no official launch date for the digital currency. But China is at the forefront of the global race to launch a digital central bank currency, and is testing the digital yuan in major cities such as Shenzhen, Beijing, Shanghai. Why is another question? Why, as is not yet official launch, the digital yuan, what's missing? The key distinction between digital currency and more disruptive cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoins is in their use of blockchain technology. The technology used by Chinese central bank is, in my point of view, very important because they operate with a centralized authority and require user identification. So it is possible to track and requires user to download a register to an app on their smartphone. Decentralization means that China government has the ability to freeze and close accounts is a different question. And the centralized system also allows users to rectify mistakes made when using or transferring digital currency. Is that possible? I won't believe that the long-term potential of the digital yuan is will be its capacity to control the legitimate hegemony power of the American dollar. In the West, the project has caused concern, and the Wall Street Journal said that the digital currency is a warning to the world. In my opinion, this is not true. There are good reasons to be confident of a digital yuan. First, it gives to China to control the illegal financial transactions. Second, how the digital currency will support the domestic retail market and the e-commerce industry, particularly as the economy rebound from the COVID pandemic has solved. Third, it has the potential to control the legitimate dominance of the US dollar in the international economy. The long term of the digital yuan will be its ability to subvert the legitimate power of the American dollar by enabling countries sanctioned by the United States to have a normal trade relation between themselves and to conduct business with China without penalties. One of the unfair consequences of the dollar dominance is that any American sanctions, the American sanctions are brutal on their target economy. So countries close to China could use the Chinese new digital currency, electronic payment, and alleviate the burdens imposed by the sanctions. It will also challenge the ability of the United States to enforce international trade penalties against China companies, such as Huawei and Douyin, the version of TikTok in China, has, you know. By operating within the margins of international finance, the digital currency also has the potential to reach less developed regions outside of China. The DCEP has one important advantage over others currency systems. Its digital wallets don't require an internet connection to be accessed by smartphone. These digital payment systems are among the most widely used in the world. Possibly, a key motivator in Chinese government push for the DCEP and its digital currency is that to control of cash flow and is expected to overtake these payment systems, and in doing so, limit the power widely by Chinese major tech firms. The system offers rich potential for China economic expansion.
Sorry, Mr. Lorido. Thanks for the series of questions. I think we have a lot of food for thought for our, guests
only
here.
Only to stop with this sentence. I hope that the advantage of the Chinese central government is the 5 years planning system allows the caution and careful implementation of the DCEP has a long-term project for a balanced and sustainable society reducing social inequities. Thank you. Thank you for everyone.
Thanks, Mr. Lorido, for all the questions and your partnership for this debate. And I want to ask maybe some of our panel members if they have anything to add on some of the questions that Mr. Lorido was asking us. And I was maybe ask Professor Chen, in terms of Mr. Lorido asked if the digital renminbi would have exactly the same status as the physical renminbi on the eyes of the Chinese legislation, and maybe you have some more information on this aspect, on the status of the digital currency would be exactly the same under the law as the physical renminbi.
As I mentioned, how to regulate the digital currency is still in the draft stage. How do we incorporate the related articles into the bank law is still in consultation. But the digital currency, and it should be different if we talk about a regulatory framework. It is because it has a different nature of the transactions. So we talk about law, but this other aspect we haven't talked is apart from the law implementations is the regulatory framework. It's on the policy side. So it is impossible to write everything in the law, but how to implement the law is belong to the policy and the regulatory framework. For example, how to monitoring, how to governance the digital currency adaptation, and also how to use the digital currency. There are a lot of informations we need to gathering. For example, data transparency. Digital currency supposed to be more safer. The security is high, but it's still there are from the use of digital currency, there are a lot of information collection process by using it, and also the customer informations as well. Then how to protect this information is a big challenge in addition to the law, which we call the governance. So regulatory and governance is also very important. That is something quite unique to the use of an adoption of the digital currency. In academic research work, we have done a traditional corporate governance for the ordinary transactions, but this digital currency actually introduced a lot of new area for research. For example, how to improve the governance of network. We call this networking governance. Mainly is to protect, it's a data protection, to protect the customer's privacy. So in terms of that, we still a lot of challenge. Though I probably think that there's still differences between the actual currency itself and the digital currency.
Thank you, Professor Chen. The issue of data protection is surely of paramount importance. We'll return to that in a few minutes. Meanwhile, let's go back to Hong Kong to Oriol Caudevilla. Professor Lorido was talking about, and this has also been somehow mentioned here, he was highlighting the potential transformational nature of the development of the digital yuan as finally a sort of a challenger when it comes to the role of the US dollar. How do you see this taking place? And also one has to take into account that the internationalization of the renminbi has been an objective put forth by Chinese authorities over the years.
Yes, thank you. Well, actually, before solving that question, I want to talk a bit about something that I should have said before, which is the fact that central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are not cryptocurrencies. I know that may sound basic, but it's important to keep that in mind. It's important because we cannot treat one like the other. No, I mean, As you know, central bank digital currencies are as centralized as anything can be because they are issued by a central bank, which means that they are legal tender. Whereas cryptocurrencies are like the opposite. I mean, they are not centralized. They are actually the flagship of this movement known as DeFi, decentralized finance. So that's why China, for example, has been adopting a tough stance towards cryptocurrencies, whilst being so eager to promote its digital yuan. And this is so because digital yuan, or DCEP, is going to be a CBDC, central bank digital currency. So it's very important to keep that in mind. We cannot like compare in any possible way or extent, let's say Bitcoin, Cardano, Solana, any cryptocurrency with any CBDC, because CBDCs are similar to the cash we are using, simply with the main difference that it's going to be digital. No, I mean, according to its name, it's a central bank issued digital currency. Whilst cryptocurrencies are something else. Actually, I mean, if you want to be much more like thorough, cryptocurrencies per se are not currencies in the sense that, I mean, it's true that they may be used to making payments, and they are so in certain like countries. No, I mean, you can do that. But generally speaking, cryptocurrencies are more a commodity, an investment asset class, a very interesting one in many senses, and yet very volatile. So that's why I'm comparing cryptos with CBDCs. It's actually very, very tricky because they are not the same at all, even though technically speaking, there are like, similarities between the both of them. For example, when China started to design digital yuan, they adopted some technical features from crypto, such as, for example, the use of both online hardware wallets or the use of a two-key architecture system to secure transactions. No, so the crypto world and the CBDC world is not like completely opposite in many ways, because technically speaking, there might be similarities. But when it comes to like a practical perspective, CBDCs are very different from crypto. So that's why, to me, it makes no sense to compare, let's say, Bitcoin with digital yuan, because digital yuan is a CBDC, and CBDCs should be compared with other CBDCs. So keeping that in mind and moving forward to your question, well, I think that to me, internationalizing the yuan is one of China's main goals. I don't think it's all about replacing physical banknotes in China, for example, because we all know that people in China are already very used to making payments by using WeChat Pay, Alipay. So I don't think it's about making people become much more tech savvy. It could be about promoting financial inclusion, it's true, but to me it's more about this idea of making the yuan, the RMB, become much more international. I mean, several elements hindered the international status of the yuan, such as, for example, its lack of convertibility for decades, etc., etc. So digital yuan is going, theoretically, to allow China to make its yuan become much more important in international trade. However, it's not going to happen like overnight. No? I mean, it's a long process, and I'm not actually even sure if we are going to get there eventually. No, but it is actually the right platform to do so. I'm not saying just that because I'm making this up. I mean, if we look at China's latest move these last few months, we actually noticed that they're actually thinking of that. For example, we saw the People's Bank of China signing in February a joint venture with SWIFT, with the payments company SWIFT, in order to internationalize the yuan. We also saw China signing the RCEP free trade agreement, which I mentioned before. We also saw China starting to test digital yuan in Hong Kong for cross-border transactions. So everything makes us think that this is one of China's objectives, definitely. And I think it might be possible to some extent for China to get that, especially because China is going to get there much faster than the US. The US, if they eventually deploy their digital US dollar, it's going to be like in many years from now, because as Professor Chen mentioned before, China started to do research on the digital yuan in 2014. It took them 6 years to do research, and now in total, 2 years to actually test it. So as you can see, it's a long process. Even in Europe, the European Central Bank is talking about a framework, a timeline of 2-3 years to deploy digital euro. But to be honest, that's not quite feasible to me. I mean, it takes like at least 4 or 5 years, or even 6 or 7, to make a CBDC become a reality. So that's why it is so important for China to have been like so faster. And solving what Oriol mentioned before about digital yuan having the potential to become a way for certain countries to bypass the US-led sanctions, well, that is true, actually. I mean, we are very used to a financial system where, to some extent, the US dollar and the US largely have been like the ones setting up the rules of that system. And that's going to change. I mean, it's going to change for 2 reasons. First of all, because of the rise of decentralized finance. Now with cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, things are not so centralized, so it doesn't depend that much on any government. But secondly, when it comes to the more traditional finance area which we are discussing now, it's also going to change because the US dollar, to some extent, may change part of its importance, which means that certain countries that were subject to sanctions may be able to bypass them through using the RMB in the future, even though there is one key element in here, one key concern, and that one is interoperability. I mean, we are talking about making the yuan or other CBDCs become used in international trade, but we need to keep in mind that in order for any CBDC to do so, it needs to become interoperable with other CBDCs, with other countries. China is working towards that, thanks to its BSN, Blockchain Service Network, launched in Beijing a while ago, which theoretically could support the use of several CBDCs. So it's working towards that, but still it requires the other countries as well to be willing to make their own CBDCs become interoperable. So it's a long process. I don't mean by that it's going to be easy, but technically it is feasible.
Thanks, Mr. Caudevilla, for the very clear explanation on this issue. And you mentioned the issue of confidentiality, and it's obviously something that regulators have in mind in terms of the amount of personal data that will be involved when it involves a digital currency. And I wanted to pass maybe to Daniel Fernandes in terms of how important it is, or how careful should governments be in terms of taking care of privacy, of data privacy, when it comes to having a digital currency, a centralized digital currency. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. I think, okay, right now in the world, there are some proposals in Europe. It's part of a digital finance package, and they were released in September 2020, and it's hundreds of pages. But basically, they are trying to regulate several aspects of how tokens that use distributed ledger technology, so DLTs, how they would operate within a financial system. Okay, so this would probably be the starting point for us to think about privacy. Dr. Oriol just mentioned now not to compare, or it's probably silly to compare CBDCs and cryptocurrencies. Well, I agree with that. And it's true that they are quite different. They might be quite different since, for example, they might not be even based on DLTs. We're not even sure if the yuan is going to be based on blockchain. It could be. Doesn't mean it will be. Until we actually see how it works and how we will move in cross-border transactions. That's the real question about data protection, where we have several data protection regulations around the world. And this would mean that one currency, one coin, let's make it singularly, one coin would be passing through several jurisdictions. And so data privacy, even though it might be centralized, I think that's the toughest question when regulators are trying to answer how to guarantee that something that's supposed to be anonymous, how will we keep a ledger of it? So how does the backbone of this framework, so technically, how does it actually work in order for it to be able to separate it into communicating sort of frameworks? So one part would be a ledger where you record all the transactions, and the other part would be probably who actually are these people, and they would be separate entities probably. It's a very hard question, and even Europe has a very they are having a lot of trouble answering this question, and they're trying to adopt other ways to go around it. So for example, and just to give you a heads up, in Liechtenstein, the Principality of Liechtenstein, they have approved it's enforced since January 2020, the so-called Blockchain Act, but it's actually one regulation to rule them all, to make a joke. It's actually a very broad regulation that regulates all kinds of tokens, and it's completely future-proof, in my opinion, since it does not mention any kind of technology particularly being used now. So it doesn't mention a cryptocurrency, it mentions TT tokens, so trusted and, I'm sorry, I forgot the other T, but it's all about being able to think ahead and how to make it future-proof. And data protection is definitely something that I find it very hard to answer. Very, very, very hard. Since it's, I think it's quite, I wouldn't say impossible, but it would require very independent entities to be able to guard this kind of data, most likely through AI.
Thanks a lot for, for the clarification on data privacy and something on the minds of many regulators all over the world at the moment. And I wanted to jump to Mr. Farinha, and I don't know if you have something to add on the topics that were discussed.
Yeah, I might start by just picking up on what Professor Chen said about the challenges that we are facing nowadays in terms of research, in terms of understanding where we're going with this technology and the change to money. I mean, money has been money for 7,000 years or more, and we are now witnessing radical changes to the way we look at money. You know, we take it for granted, and now we are starting to look at it fundamentally different. And I think cryptocurrencies have a huge role to play in that. I think for the first time we have an alternative to traditional centralized issued currencies and central bank or central government currencies. And that has led everyone to start looking at, okay, there's another way to deal with money. And it comes down to trust, right? So are you willing to trust your government with your money? Most of the times, thankfully, the answer is yes, we are. But in some cases, then, that proves problematic. We've seen, in history, we've seen several cases where governments, through the power of monetary policy, devalued the currency and broke the trust with the people. So the cryptocurrencies, I think, is important to remember, are here for a reason, because they were created as an alternative to the exceptions, the problems that money sometimes can arise through that central power. So there's a place, I believe, and I'm glad I'm not alone. We have, for example, President Vladimir Putin, who says there's a value, there's a place for cryptocurrencies in the world. Unfortunately, China doesn't see it the same way, so they're trying to be more strict about it. But one thing that I think is undoubtable is that cryptocurrencies are the research that we needed. Central governments are using much of that technology, or at least some of that technology, in their own central digital currencies. So surely there is value in the research that's happening on the fringes, on those alternative cryptocurrencies, and having all these, a whole new generation of young developers and young people who never really thought about currency and now are thinking about it because they see it is something they can program, it's something they can modify, they can play with. And it's just a different way to look at it. So I think my point I want to say is that we have to kind of learn from our mistakes, I believe, and learn from history. And regulation here is, I think, a potential issue, because the reason why we have a financial system that is so inefficient, expensive, and slow is not all to blame on the banks. I think they have no choice to be conservative because of regulatory frameworks that force them to be that way. I think that regulation here, over-regulation, may be the problem, and we should allow cryptocurrencies to develop in their own pace. They are not going to replace central money anytime soon, but also I think there is no reason to be overly aggressive in shutting them down, as unfortunately is the case for example, in China. So I wanted to say that one.
Could I just add something? I agree with Daniel Farinha here. The research used with cryptocurrency is vital to understand what is probably the way to go. Cryptocurrencies are right now, they're so versatile. And in Europe, one of the proposals called MiCA, which aims to basically define what are the different kinds of cryptocurrencies. And some of them, if I was able to, some of them, you could categorize them in basically three: asset-referenced tokens, which could be stable coins, e-money, which could be a digital euro, or even just a catch-all for crypto assets. So it could be utility tokens, for example. That's also a third category. And this I think is the first playground, the first playground to be able to think about how you'd be able to define data privacy, how you'd be able to define certain aspects of the whole framework before you're able to think about the framework applicable for CBDCs. Because right now, if MiCA is approved as it is right now, this would mean that you'd have the issuers, they would have to comply with several financial regulations. To name a few, you'd have to have a minimum capital to be able to operate. You'd have to be a legal entity, obviously. You'd have to apply for a license or an authorization to operate. So there are several aspects that cryptocurrencies are able to prepare us or lay the groundwork for CBDCs to work before CBDCs are able to work in Europe. And I think Macau probably could look into what China is doing and copy import some legislation that is being proposed elsewhere, so to diversify our current financial system to allow for more development in this area, since FinTech it is really promising around the world except Macau.
Let's see what happens next. Thank you, Daniel Senna Fernandes. And now it's time for us to encourage the participants, both those who are joining us via Zoom and also those who are here. We have full house. That shows the interest that this topic is garnering. So the floor is yours to the audience. Would you like to join us with a remark, a question, anything to enrich this conversation? We have, please go ahead, introduce yourself and join the conversation.
Hi, my name is Rodrigo. I'm a software engineer here in Macau. And my question is to all the panelists, mostly Danielle. You mentioned that the digital RMB might not use blockchain technology.
Sorry. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rodrigo. I'm a software engineer here in Macau. And my question is mostly to Danielle, but to the whole panel. You said that the digital RMB might not use blockchain technology or a distributed ledger technology in it. So if that does happen, then how is the digital RMB different from the paper fiat RMB, except for the fact that there are not one-for-one notes in the central bank to back it up? Yeah.
Well, thank you for your question. Blockchain is a distributed ledger technology, but most likely it will not be the first or the last kind of technology that would allow for this kind of transactions. Right now, the white paper is available, I believe. I have not read the white paper of the EU one. However, if it does not use that technology, it might use some other kind of technology that would allow for this kind of transactions to take place. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll just
Actually,
come in. Can I just come in on one more thing?
Sure.
The answer will be it's not different. Even if you also use a blockchain, it's not different from having in the fundamental point that it's centrally issued. So the issue of trust is still there. You have to trust the government, not to devalue the currency, right? In most cases that's the case, but in some cases that fails. So whether it's using blockchain or not, it's immaterial here. It's about, is there central control over this currency? Well, in CBDCs, yes. The answer is clearly yes. And in all CBDCs, regardless which country is issuing them. An open, borderless, censorship-resistant, and immutable open public blockchain, like a cryptocurrency, is fundamentally not controlled by any government. That's the value that people see in that. that it cannot be devalued by one. So a CBDC, regardless of whether it uses blockchain or not, it still has the same issue with you trusting the government fully. So that's still.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes,
Oriol?
actually, I would like to add on something about this question. Basically, the thing is, unlike cryptocurrencies, which are normally based on blockchain, CBDCs are different. No? They might or might not be based on blockchain. In some cases, they will be, or at least partially. When it comes to China, China will actually use, or they're intending to use blockchain on a second level, because it's going to be issued on a two-layer. No? The first level is going to be the People's Bank of China issuing digital yuan to commercial banks, and then on a second level, those commercial banks issuing the digital yuan to the public. So blockchain is going to be used there, apparently. For example, in a recent speech, I think it was from September, from T. Gang, who's the deputy director of China's Central Bank Digital Currency Institute, he talked about that. And he mentioned that the idea would be to use blockchain for this second layer, for this second level. So blockchain is going to be used, but just as Professor Farinha just mentioned, it's different. It's not just about using our blockchain. There are many more things involved, because at the end of the day, no matter what technology we use, it's going to be issued by a central bank. So it's a different idea compared to cryptos in that sense as well.
Thank you, Oriol. We have a question from one of our Zoom participants, Terence Lee. Does the panel think Macau has any unique advantage for the adoption of this technology? Professor Chen, do you think that's there will be room here in Macau for any function in this respect?
Yeah, I think there are several things we could regard as an opportunity. We could also regard as a challenge. And the first thing is that we talk about institutional barriers, institutional environment. That is something Macau should think about it. If they really want to use kind of a digital currency, digital yuan, they have to develop some law regulatory framework and the governance framework. That is on the institutional level. But more interesting, and I think this opportunity for Macau is technology development. We talk about whether or not to use the blockchain to support the use of a digital currency. The answer is still uncertain. That is actually some technical area, we could further research into to do some investigations. That is something I think everyone can do, and the government authorities, universities, research institute, companies, private companies, public companies can work together, on this aspect, technology development, and also the design of the digital currency. Brainstorming, come up with a more easy to use design of a digital currency. That is something also very important. The other area for any country, not only Macau, not only limited to Macau, is for the infrastructure. Means, for example, the internet connection, internet coverage. That is the backbone for using the digital currency, and also cross-border. We talk about cross-border settlement system. That is also something quite complicated. And think about Macau is a small region. Then everything could be, most of the transactions, trading activities, tourism, gaming industry will involve a kind of cross-border settlement. So that, how to develop that system is also something, quite interesting. I would say maybe in these three areas, Macau can actively participate in the development.
Thank you. So we have infrastructure, we have institutions, we have technology, the people. Yes. And this is one of the key, it's been always a talk of the town, the issue of nurturing local talents or importing talents in this respect. As an educationist and as a researcher in this area, the University of Macau and other universities, St. Joseph and other universities are focusing on this. What could be the role of the educational institutions and research institutions to kind of spur the development of local talents and the technology here?
I will two kind of, or probably three kind, things university can do. One is develop some new degree program, which reflect the multidisciplinary collaborations between the financial industry itself and the traditional financial industry and science and technology. So thought program is one thing. Other thing is a research program, joint research collaborations between the universities and also the industry. We can set up a consortium, to work together to leverage the strength of each universities and also the industry. Other thing, we could engage more people is through the training. Some training, some basic training on the technology itself, on the financial industry, financial products, what the currency is about. For example, what's the difference between the digital currency and the third-party payment platform? These are knowledge, I think, are quite needed by the public. So provide sufficient training for us is also, I think, one of our obligations.
Thanks, Professor. I wanted to also pass for the rest of our panelists. In terms of, one of the issues of developing Macau as a possible FinTech sector, as authorities have mentioned quite a few times in the last year. In terms of developing this area in Macau, what would you see as the challenges in terms of the professional, the qualified personnel that maybe, what kind of policies you think could be advanced to develop FinTech in general?
Well, maybe I'll follow on Professor Jean's comment because, again, I guess academia can play a role. For example, we've had a course recently training people on the basics of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and decentralized finance. The problem is what we're trying to do, and I think what we could do more of, is to demystify the technology that's been created under the auspice of cryptocurrencies. Because there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around this topic, and unfortunately, partly to blame by the regulators who keep on, throwing out things like, money laundering, criminal activity, terrorist financing, things which are, I think not necessarily to blame on cryptocurrencies. I think it's to blame on money. That's just the way money works, and most criminal activities, I think, still take place in US dollars and cash, rather than on public ledgers where every transaction can be traced for the entirety of the humanity. So there is a lot of fear and cause around cryptocurrencies and the technology. And I think our role first is to demystify that, is to say it's not what you think. It's actually just a technology that empowers decentralization, empowers trading one-to-one without going through a third party, without trusting a third party. So that demystification and that education I think is the first thing, so people can actually be more willing to get involved, to learn, and to train on that kind of technology. Unfortunately, again, under the cloud of potentially one day becoming, trading cryptocurrency being a criminal activity, there's still a threat there. There's still a fear there that China may actually move on to, after slowly curbing down on cryptocurrency activities like mining, like centralized exchanges, and now they potentially could move after kind of individual peer-to-peer trades and criminalizing that. I mean, imagine that, criminalizing just exchange of value from one person to another through a technology like that. That would just basically put an end to that. So we have that problem, and we have to hopefully approach regulators and say, can we have some space to explore the technology? Because obviously it's good technology, it's being used by central governments to develop their efforts, so they can't be all that bad. That's what I would say.
Maybe, Daniel, one thing that is mentioned surrounds all, obviously, the very different centralized and decentralized, is the technology that powers them, or at least was initiated for this kind of decentralized currencies in terms, specifically blockchain and the ledger system that allows it. And have you seen other uses that this technology can be put in place for banking, for other industries or other areas that actually this technology can have uses in Macau or certain areas, other financial areas in Macau?
I believe there are several aspects of decentralized finance that could be applied here in Macau. There are several products. Actually, a very simple Google search is you get hundreds of queries, and actually, decentralized finance in Macau most likely would be very beneficial, as it would accelerate most of the financial system. Since some of the transactions, some of the processes would be automatized, so this would mean, okay, without going into detail about products or possible applications, since that I'm an amateur on that point of view. The only thing I actually look at right now is on the regulation part of it. So, for example, if you'd like to pick up on a product that probably is not, it wouldn't be included as a financial kind of a financial product. You could think of it as a utility token, which obviously has some economic value. So, for example, there's this token called HNT Helium, and it's a token that people would be distributing their own Wi-Fi, and this Wi-Fi would be creating HNT tokens, and these tokens would be able to be used by small applications. So, for example, like in China, you have so many bicycles, electronic bicycles, where you just rent them. So people, instead of using money, they would use this HNT token. So they would spend this token, and they can acquire it through either sharing their own Wi-Fi, their own internet, or through purchasing directly to DEXs, so decentralized exchange service providers. So yes, this kind of tokens could exist in Macau. I believe there is a market for it, but the problem is regulation and the infrastructure, the framework. We don't have it. And for example, even picking up on HNT, tokens like HNT most likely are breaching, people who are actually mining this token are most likely breaching their contract with their internet service provider. Because I'm pretty sure there would be a clause saying something like you are not to resell or repurpose or whatever, something related to sharing this and obtaining financial benefit. The way that Macau could do it, if you want to centralize it, would be, okay, so for example, CTM would create their own token, and they would, okay, now you can use this, you can use this token to pay for this kind of systems. So if in a completely moneyless, fiat moneyless world, you'd be able to diversify, okay, this currency is used for, the CBDC is for certain kind of commerce, and for specialized kind of commerce, you'd have different tokens. And this would mean that you'd have layers upon layers upon layers of regulation. So you'd be able to create sort of like a pyramid, where you'd have significant tokens on top, and you'd have like crypto assets on the bottom. So this actually is, in my opinion, one of the most logical way to go. But obviously it all comes down to the technology that will be used and applications with the products that the community in Macau wishes to serve. Which is also why, sorry, I'm just final note, which is also why I believe that the regulation should exist. It should be future-proof in the sense that technologies are not mentioned specifically. So it'd be a more broad kind of term. So you'd be able to be more like an umbrella kind of definition. So you'd be able to provide a more sustainable ground for development, which is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel Senna Fernandes. Surely there are a number of participants here at Cunha Foundation who would like to jump in and share their views or throw in some questions. Please.
Good evening, everyone. Pedro Pablo from Asia Pioneer Entertainment. I would like to make a question, maybe continuing on the topic you were just covering, and based in Macau. We see some IRs, so integrated resorts, and casino operators actually moving into cryptocurrencies. So my point and question would be, would the Macau government actually think or start their move faster if IRs would actually push this movement? Or are they just using what we hear and know about in regards to the legislation development for cryptocurrencies just being targeted for digital RMB? Maybe more specific for Daniel Senna Fernandes. Thank you.
Thank you. And hooking up with what Pedro was saying, we have a question which is simply from one of our Zoom participants, Terence Lee. How does digital currency affect the casino industry? So you were talking not only about the casino, but also the integrated resorts and all of that. Please, the floor is yours. It's one of the burning questions these days.
Well, to be honest, I think that, okay, and I'm being really optimistic here. I really wish that Macau would go forward with a more broad and looking ahead, like true vision when preparing the regulation for cryptocurrency, crypto assets, tokens to be more generic. I think that what the chief executive meant was to prepare this financial system for the e-yuan and for other fiat, to other CBDCs. I think this is what he actually meant. But I think that if you're already preparing the groundwork to accept CBDCs, why not go a step further and just say, okay, we have this on one side, on the other hand, we have something else. Digital tokens being able to be accepted and liability being able to be prescribed first. The biggest issue, I think, with crypto assets is first, data privacy, second, liability. These are the two groundwork, the two pillars, I'd say, that create a lot of problems to legislators, I think. As I mentioned before, data privacy is a really complicated issue. MiCA tries to solve this issue with the fact that they would require registration. So integrated resorts being able to create their own tokens, they require a registration. So at least they know their clients. So some parts of the regulation that is required for these kind of tokens which can have economic interest, some kind of value, they would be able to comply with certain aspects of the financial requirements. Now, the other problem on the other side is liability. If integrated resorts are issuing tokens, and they, for example, would mean running a sort of what's the word? Like a game, and you win a prize. What if there's a duplicate? Of course, you'd prevent this on the terms and conditions upon registration. But if you could have a backbone, if something else goes wrong, if you have the backbone where liability would be able to take place, you had not bylaws, actual regulation issued by the government. Okay, that would be different. In Portugal, for example, you do not have this kind of issue, you don't have this kind of solution yet, even though it's in the EU.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel Senna Fernandes. I can see that Oriol Caudevilla is taking a number of mental notes or even notes on what's been discussed here. How, seen from Hong Kong and from your lens, this all conversation on Macau's adopting digital currency, IR, integrated resorts, and the effect the casino industry, and also Macau as a fintech hub. Altogether, what are your 2 cents on this?
Well, I actually do agree with what Daniel just mentioned about this topic. I mean, I think that if digital yuan were to be like deployed to some extent in the casinos, it would be precise, to keep a better track of the flows, because one of the rationales behind CBDCs is precisely that of preventing or fighting financial crime much more efficiently, because it's going to allow governments and central banks to keep a much better track of everything that's been done in certain countries. So in that sense, CBDCs can be useful. Of course, there is this huge concern regarding privacy. It is possible to ensure privacy whilst keeping a much more effective and close track to transactions, but it's, of course, a challenge. It's actually the main concern in many areas. In Europe, for example, the European Central Bank launched last year a survey on the area of the digital euro, the potential digital euro, and they asked what were the main concerns that people had, and number one was by far privacy. So that's, of course, going to be an issue. And I don't know if we covered that one before, but I saw some people asking about digital currencies and cryptocurrencies, which is, I'm going to take this one briefly before finishing, because I want to cover that in the sense that, it's pretty much what I said before, about CBDCs and cryptocurrencies. The thing is, CBDCs have a different rationale or purpose than that of cryptocurrencies. So except for the stable coins, which is the only area where there could be an overlap between them and CBDCs, to me, CBDCs serve a completely different purpose, as I said before, compared to crypto. So that's why I don't think that by more governments starting to issue CBDCs, more people will use or stop using cryptocurrencies. I don't think there is such a correlation. I know that some governments think that way, because I know that some governments are kind of pushing CBDCs as a way to privately counter those privately issued cryptocurrencies. But I don't think there needs to be a correlation between them. Actually, I think it's the opposite. I know it's kind of a crossing remark. It's not yet, but the idea to me is that the future of money is going to include a large amount of factors in that area. It's going to include CBDCs quite likely. It's going to include the physical cash and notes that we still have. And in most countries, not in China because they decided to adopt this tough stance, but in many others, cryptocurrencies as well. And each one of them will play a different role. Let's face it, most of us wouldn't like to have our salary fully paid in cryptocurrencies, even if cryptos are allowed in our jurisdiction, because you never know what value Bitcoin is going to have tomorrow. One of the elements that makes Bitcoin and other cryptos so attractive is the fact that it is very volatile. So it may be a great investment for you, but it's a double-edged sword. For example, 1 year ago, Bitcoin was valued at $17,000 US. Right now, it's valued at over $58,000. So as you can see, there's been almost a fourfold increase in the price of Bitcoin. So yes, of course, if your salary was paid in Bitcoin 1 year ago, now you would be much wealthier than you are now. But at the same time, it's a huge risk because in the same way that it goes up, it can go down. So yeah, I think that the future of money is going to include all this. And sorry for talking so much about other areas, but I thought it was important to read my thoughts on that as well.
Sure, no, we want passion about our topics. And I'll open again to the public. This gentleman there.
Yes. Nuno Pereira, I'm a legal advisor. I want to ask a special question for the Professor Chen because I want to try to understand what is this digital currency. Because we know the creation of the money is one of the most important monetary policies for the states. I want to know, because China is drafting the new legislation about this creation of this kind of currency. There will be some limits about this creation of this quantity of the money, or it's illimitable, without limits can create any the digital currency? Because we know the physical money, we have some gold or reserves funds in the central banks to guarantee the circulation of the money. How about the digital currency? There's some limits of the creation, or the states can create any amount of the digital currency. Thanks.
Right, I think that's related to the money creation. Well, the digital currency can help the government to monitor the supply and the demand of the money. And that will ultimately affect the monetary policy of a country. At the moment, creation depends on the demand. So why people need that? Why the industry need that? Why the international trade and the investment need that? So even within the country, we all know China is quite leading position in this digital currency development, but still, for the short or probably the minimum term, it is still restricted to very limited industry all the activities, commercial activities like the e-platform in some retail sector. It's still, pretty much, restricted. I mean, the application, in the retail sector. So the application scenario has not that broad to be able to give more room for the supply of the digital currency. So that is, my perception. And also internationally, it also affected by the acknowledgement, appreciation, or development of a digital currency overseas. If you want to use the different digital currency for the trading purpose or investment purpose, it will have to be appreciated and acknowledged, accepted by your partner, your trading partners overseas. That is also something is quite difficult, to develop at the same speed, within China and outside China. And other complication is this international settlement system. Again, we talk about institutions, infrastructures. It will have to support the adoption. And we take internet, for example. That is an important infrastructure for digital currency. So across the world, and the internet connections is not always the same. And they're quite different, That is a big barrier for the adaptation of the digital currency. That is, very basic infrastructures will have to be will have to support the supply and demand of the digital currency.
Because I think it's important to remember that it's been a while since any kind of national currency has been backed by gold or any kind of other tangible assets. That's why we call them fiat currencies. They can be printed at will, as we saw recently with the United States, the Federal Reserve printing trillions of dollars just because of the packet reliefs for the pandemic. And the same thing with any other national currency. They are not backed by any assets. They are backed by your trust on the government, not to print too much. Okay, so it's important to settle that, and that's where cryptocurrencies come in, especially things like Bitcoin, because they offer that assurance that there is a limit to the issuance. It's been predefined, it's in code, but it's immutable. It cannot be changed. So you have predictability in terms of issuance, and that's something that no fiat currency can provide. That I know.
The costs of the creation of the digital currencies is lesser than the physical. For the states, it's more easy,
Press a button.
Actually, that is the one advantage, for the digital currency. The production of money, and it's quite costly, but digital currency is not. But I think at the end of the day, we also touched on the base for Oriol about the impact of digital currency on the internationalization of Chinese currency, probably in a short period of time, the impact could be very limited. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not the form or type of the currency. It's really depend on the economic power and the political and the cultural. All the use strength on this will actually have a big impact in the development of any currency or use of any currency. And also the financial system, financial market, the openness of trade activities, the openness of a financial market all play a very important role.
Thank you. Before we finish, we have time for one very last question from the audience. Not, I will be. There's another question from one of our Zoom participants, has been partially addressed, but by Angel Low. If more and more governments start issuing digital currencies, do you think people will still use cryptocurrency? This was addressed partially, but I'd like you to comment on this. And I do have a question, which is as simple as follows. What's the future of banking in a world dominated by central bank-backed official digital currencies?
That's a good question. Well, whether people will buy or acquire a cryptocurrency depends on a number of factors. One is are they allowed to acquire it? Because in some places now it's becoming more and more difficult to do so. And the willingness for them to acquire many components, again, it could be the investment and speculative aspect of it, and a lot of people are drawn to cryptocurrencies because they see easy gains, which again could be not always the case. So you have to be. It's not for the faint of heart, I will tell you. I've been in crypto for a number of years now, since 2013. So it's something that you really have to think long term if you're thinking about investment. But again, it's about the dynamic of the people and their governments. If they have no reasons to not trust their government, there's no reason not to trust the central digital currency because it works. It's going to be much more efficient with the new technologies that are being laid out. They're really kind of renewing the whole of the mechanics of the financial system with a whole new set of technologies that will make it much more efficient and cheaper as well. And yeah, as long as you can know that your currency will hold value reasonably well, inflation will stay 2-3% or whatever it is supposed to be, not 5% as it's been or 6% as it's been in Macau for a number of years. And I think there's no reason not to adopt it, not to use it. There is the issue of data privacy. There's the issue of that totalitarian control and oversight, which you don't have in cash because cash is still fairly private. These currencies will have that effect of replacing cash, which means there will be essentially potentially no privacy if there's no measures put in place for that. And of course, governments might not have an incentive if the people don't demand it. And again, all the money laundering, AML, KYC elements that there are also forced by regulators upon the system. So again, it really depends on the economic context that you live in. And again, different countries will go through different experiences. I think here in Macau and China, people are not going to, there's no reason to be necessarily fearful of the currency. In other places, that's probably not going to happen. Other countries will do it for different reasons. For example, countries that might want to work or avoid the US dollar as the world reserve, they might adopt, for example, cryptocurrencies like happened recently in El Salvador, who adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, the first country to do so. Other countries are becoming much more crypto-friendly as well because they also see it as an alternative to the pervasiveness of the US dollar as a world reserve. I still think that, for example, cryptocurrencies are an excellent potential world reserve, one which is neutral, because why would you have a currency like the US dollar or the RMB or the digital euro as the world reserve? Why not have something that's neutral, that cannot be controlled by any one country and issued at will? So I still think there's potential there for cryptocurrencies to fill that gap. But yeah, it again depends on the context.
Anyone, thank you, Daniel. Anyone would like to comment on this and on the issue, in a nutshell, of the future of banking in a world where central bank-backed digital currencies reign?
Sure, I would like to add. Sorry,
Go ahead.
Sorry, Oriol,
Please.
please, Oriol, please.
Oh, no, thank you. No, basically, I just covered like the first part, but just focusing on the future of banking. Well, I mean, I think that CBDCs per se do not imply the role of commercial banks diminishing because, I mean, it is possible, theoretically speaking, for a CBDC to be issued directly to the public and thus skipping commercial banks. So in that case, yes, we might be facing a scenario where commercial banks would be losing part of their market share, or actually most of it. But, I mean, in most cases, most CBDC projects are actually focused towards this two-tier model where they're going to issue the CBDC to the commercial banks, and then the commercial banks are going to issue the CBDC to the public, which means that commercial banks are going to remain their position. They're going to be the ones issuing the CBDC nonetheless. So I think the future of banking will involve adapting to this new reality. This new reality will mean that it's not just about the physical cash and notes, it's also about CBDCs, also about cryptocurrencies, at least in certain countries. And so I think it's all about that. For example, in Singapore, we are seeing banks like DBS tapping into this. They created this DBS exchange, this crypto exchange. So it shows that, I mean, I know that traditional banks tend to be conservative because as Daniel Farinha mentioned before, there are many regulations in place, no? So it's not easy for them, even if they want to be more like bold, to actually be it. But at the same time, well, I mean, there are certain countries, certain areas where banks are becoming much more bold. So I think in that sense, the future of banking is going to involve or to encompass like a perfect mixture of virtual banking, of course, of CBDCs plus cash, which will remain in place, and in some cases, cryptocurrencies as well. Daniel Farinha mentioned the case of El Salvador, and I think it's very interesting to see what's happening there, because as you know, they made Bitcoin become legal tender in September, but at the same time, well, I feel like El Salvador might not be like the perfect example for most countries in the sense that they lacked any right monetary policy whatsoever before. So I think in that sense, it might not be like the best example, no? But I mean, it's interesting, no? Because we see like countries like China adopting this tougher stance towards cryptos. Others are like much more crypto-friendly like Singapore, whilst others like El Salvador like completely the opposite and adopting Bitcoin's legal tender. So no matter what approach you adopt in general, I think that the idea is that banking needs to be much more open, much more tech-friendly. They need to merge with the fintech firms, no? Because it's not about competing with fintech firms in the future. I think it's about cooperation. Banks need technology, and fintech firms need this kind of reputation and client base that traditional banks have. So it's all about collaborating. I see a future of collaboration and a future which will encompass all these several elements that I mentioned, CBDCs, cryptos, etc.
Thanks again, Caudevilla, for those final remarks. And we usually ask the panel on the Macau Business TV series if they have any final remarks, so how they want to conclude. I don't know if anybody has something that they want to conclude. Yeah, if not, I guess we'll take this session to an end of almost very interesting 1 hour and a half about this issue. So centralized, decentralized currencies and fintech. And again, we want to thank everybody that came to our debate and watched the debate online. And again, our thanks to the Macau Foundation and the Observatory for China and the Cunha Foundation. So thanks again for everybody. And have a good evening.